Hi, everyone. We're back here with another fantastic interview. Karen Reimer and Brad Chisholm here. Today, we're talking to a good friend of mine and mentor of mine, coach, all around wonderful guy, Ken Beaton. Ken has, he's been in real estate for a long time. I'll let Ken tell you a little bit about his story, but Ken knows, lots and lots about single family investing, but his specialties are more on the creative financing side of things and multifamily investing. And today we're going to pick Ken's brain a little bit, and he's going to share some ideas on some of the advantages of multifamily investing and why it's a really great idea to be involved in multifamilies and how it compares to owning single family houses or duplexes, and just kind of the comparisons between those two and some of the advantages. So with that, thanks a lot for joining us today, Ken. It's fantastic to have you here.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
I should mention, Ken's invested kind of all across the country, but he's situated in Ontario, so he's got a little bit of a different take on kind of the regionality of things. But is regionality even a word? Did I just make that up?
Oh, it is now. It's out there.
But having experience all across the country, he's got some insights that he can share on different areas. So first of all, Ken, would you mind just telling us just briefly a little bit about how you got involved and kind of where you're at today for real estate investing?
Sure. Yep. Well, I started investing back in 2001, and it was the turning point for me was after reading the book Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Because prior to that, I had been a real estate agent in the early 90s, and I'm just, I guess, naturally curious about doing things differently, and always looking for different ways of doing things. And in the early 90s, all I kept hearing from fellow colleagues and my brokers was, you can't do that, that's not how it's done, and so forth. So I just kept hitting brick wall after brick wall, and finally just got frustrated and gave up. And after reading the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, I realized that I could have done everything I was trying to do if I only knew how to do it properly. And the challenge was with the people who are in the industry. The typical average realtor is not educated as an investor. They're educated as a realtor, which is two very different things. And so that just opened up the floodgates for me. It also allowed me to not only start investing, but discover my passion for teaching, because as I learned more about investing, taking the courses, I actually ended up being hired by was Wealth Intelligence Academy, and then eventually the Rich Dad Education Company hired me as one of their mentors. So I did that for a few years, and then I decided that I was just going to go out and do my own thing as far as education goes. And that's how I met Brad. I don't know how many years ago now, about 6-7 years ago, maybe. Came through the, it's a while, yeah. Time flies, I'm afraid. During that whole time, I was still buying and selling real estate as well. I actually was convinced by a friend to move out to Edmonton in 2010 and start a real estate brokerage, which resulted in me getting my real estate license and ultimately my broker's license, and opened up a brokerage out there where I had agents focused on investment properties only, and that's all we dealt with was investors looking for investment properties. Came back to Ontario, maintained my license, and maintained my education business for a while. And at one point in time, we had over 300 doors in the early 2000s. And then I always had a dream of building a brand new build. But the challenge was the rents didn't support the cost for the building until just recently. And then it's a matter of finding the land and going through the development, et cetera, et cetera. And in the meantime, a local developer started to build new apartment buildings, 24-unit buildings. And we saw an opportunity where we could buy those from the developer. And we sold off all of our older stuff And we are now closing on our fourth property here in the town of Almont come July, I guess it is. So we'll have 4 24-unit buildings in our own backyard. And Joanne says I can't buy any more after that. So
A limit to everything.
We'll see how that goes. Well, thanks very much. So for someone who's already an investor and understands the benefits of real estate and how it can create long-term wealth, but hasn't quite made that leap from single family properties or duplexes into the world of multifamily investing, how would you help them navigate, or what kind of tips would you be able to give for someone that's looking to make that transition and to get into multifamily investing? Because like a lot of people think that it's a completely different animal, right? Like it's for a lot of people it seems really intimidating, and it's just I just don't want to get involved in that kind of stuff. It's too big, too much. I don't know how to do it. But as we know, it's really straightforward.
It's actually easier than buying single family residential properties, and mainly because of the banking rules for qualifying, et cetera. But the biggest challenge with respect to investors, there's 2 points. One is to make the move from the single families or the smaller properties into the bigger properties, they don't understand the processes, and they think they know, they can just apply everything they learned early on to the bigger properties. Well, there's a lot more to it than just turn around and apply it. You do need to learn the ins and outs about it. The other thing is the mindset, and a lot of people are overwhelmed by the size of the property and the number of units that they are now managing, the people they're responsible for and the people they're managing, as well as the number of zeros on their mortgage now, because the mortgage is obviously going to be significantly higher. But it truly is all relative. The benefits far outweigh the cons with respect to getting into it. But you have to first of all get over that mindset, and I think the best thing to do for that is to be around other investors who are doing it and learn from them with respect to how it is to manage that many people, how it is to manage the debt, and what is the level of risk, etc. But honestly, it truly is, my experience has been, it is truly easier to finance and qualify a good quality 12-unit, 18-unit building than a duplex. And the simple reason is that when you are financing anything 6 units or less, depends on the lenders, but typically 6 units or less, the lenders want you, the individual, to qualify and guarantee the debt based upon your income ability, and then only allow you a portion of the income that property is going to generate to add on to your ability to qualify, but they'll take 100% of the expenses and add it on as well. So you very quickly run out of qualifying ability in order to buy these properties. Whereas if you buy the larger building, from a qualifying perspective, it's the property that has to qualify. The numbers have to make sense. If the numbers don't make sense, the debt credit ratio doesn't make sense, then the bank doesn't want to touch it. And then what they do, if the property is good, then they look at the individual, not so much for qualifying for the mortgage, but for their ability to, a good credit rating primarily. You do have to have a decent net worth. You have to be able to support the debt in the event that something does go wrong. But that bank is basically looking at, are you a good person? Are you going to pay your bills? Because you got the property, you got the income from the property to support it, as long as you apply the income to the bills. So that's the difference. And case in point is when we moved back from out west, we wanted to buy a new house here we live in Eastern Ontario, a small town. And we had a heck of a time qualifying for our house mortgage, because neither of us had full-time employment anymore, and we were self-employed before that. And they wanted us to put 30% down. We couldn't get CMHC financing, and the interest rates were higher than what the average individual was getting. Yet at the same time, we were buying 2 apartment buildings worth combined, I think it was $4.7 million at the same time, and there was no issue with that. And we qualified. It was much easier to buy the apartment buildings. So I
totally
forget what the
believe you.
question. I don't even know what the question was anymore. You see, that's I get off on tangents.
But it's very true what you're saying, Ken. I have that trouble every day where people, just a typical residential home, and yet when you look at the underwriting process for a multi-unit, it is much, much easier.
Yeah. The other thing is, I first sort of scratched my head. I mean, if you are a renter and you want to buy an investment property, you want to buy a house or a duplex for a rental property, the banks won't touch you because you don't own your own house. But if you buy an apartment building, that's not a problem.
Yep.
It makes
is.
zero
That's how
sense.
it goes.
Yeah,
I know it does.
So I'm thinking about the differences in managing not just the building, but like a 1 18-unit building versus 9 duplexes.
Yep.
So you've got the same number of doors, right? You've still got 18 units that you're responsible for, but your maintenance and upkeep is going to be significantly different. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's just the logistics. I mean, you're not going to buy 9 houses, 9 duplexes in one neighborhood on one city block or something like that, whereas your 18-unit building is going to be in one location. So just the ease of getting to and from the property is going to make much more sense as well. You can have an on-site person at your building taking care or helping you take care of that one building, versus you've got 9 properties spread throughout the city. You're not going to have an on-site person helping you there, yet you still have the same amount of work, if not more, because you're now moving to different locations. You've got multiple laneways to shovel out. You've got multiple yards to take care of. You've got multiple roofs to take care of. You've got multiple furnaces, etc. Whereas with your one apartment building, you've got one furnace, you've got one roof, you've got one parking lot. It's just so much simpler and easier to have it all under one roof, basically.
So to speak.
So to speak, yeah. No pun intended.
The other thing, we were speaking to the gentleman from CMLS a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that came up was just how increasing your rents, or even finding an underperforming building and increasing your rents just a small amount, $25 a month, how that can have a significant increase in the value of your property.
Yep.
Versus increasing rent on a duplex doesn't change the value of the property, because that's all based on residential qualification rules.
Yep.
Yes and no, but definitely more so. You're right for the most part there. A perfect example of this is that I've got a building currently listed for sale, a 22-unit building, and they've just renovated 4 of the units. They've increased the rents in those 4 units by $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year, which has increased the valuation by about $260,000 in our market. Okay, they're still asking the original sale price, but all of a sudden it makes it easier to qualify for financing on that property, because the income is going to support a higher, debt to loan ratio, debt value ratio, sorry, loan to value ratio. That's the word I'm looking for. And it's very, very important. Another example of that is I had a 11-unit building, and we replaced the furnace. And you think, okay, well, how is that going to increase the value of your building? Well, a furnace is going to be providing the heat for the entire building. Therefore, the cost of that operating that furnace is going to be carried by the landlord, because it's going to be inclusive. Their heat's going to be inclusive. So if I can reduce my costs by a couple $1,000, that's going to increase my net income, which is going to increase the valuation of the property. So whether you increase the income or decrease the expenses, or a combination of the two, you can increase the value of the property. And you can do that through prudent property management, maintaining and getting the rents up to where they should be, maintaining the property so you have less expenses in maintenance, changing out high cost appliances like your furnace that's going to save money. Whereas if you have that a single family house that you bought as an investment and you are downloading all of the expenses onto the tenants, so the tenants paying for their own electricity, they're paying for their own heat, they're paying for their own water, sewer, because it's all individually metered, which makes sense. But all of a sudden the furnace dies. Well, who's responsible for the furnace? The landlord. So the landlord has to spend $5,000, $6,000 for this new furnace, but who benefits from that? If it's a brand new furnace, the cost of heating is probably going to go down a little bit. It's a nice high efficiency furnace. That's not going to be to the landlord's benefit. That's going to be to the tenant's benefit. It does not increase the value of the house. So that's a perfect example of how it is so different with respect to the small deals versus the big deals.
Yeah, that's just that. I often think, and we've talked about this quite a bit, but just how you've got everything in one space. You've got one furnace, one boiler. Yep. You've got everything is just there, rather than running around looking after 10 or 15 furnaces or 10 or 15 roofs, so on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, if somebody is a brand new investor, they're just dipping their toe into the water of investing, I wouldn't suggest they go out and buy an 18-unit apartment building. Okay, that's going to be a little bit beyond their context, and they'll become overwhelmed with all of that process. What I would suggest they do is go out and buy a duplex or triplex type of thing for their first property. But I wouldn't necessarily, unless a deal falls in your lap, I wouldn't go looking for more duplexes and triplexes. I'd get that one under my belt first, go through the process, in the due diligence process, the whole bit, because once you start looking at the bigger deals, it's the exact same process. So get your toes wet with the small ones and move into the big ones then.
I think, yeah, the other thing too with that is that you get that familiarity of working on a smaller scale, of like managing tenants or managing the property manager, and kind of what to look for as far as just the little things that happen in the building, and how to deal with the people and all of that. And then once you're comfortable at a smaller scale with 2 or 3, then you can start to ramp up with 12 or 18.
Exactly.
And do it stepwise.
Yeah. And if you're going to make mistakes, it's much better to make a mistake on a duplex than it is on a 18-unit building. It's just, it's easier to absorb the mistakes on a smaller scale.
So that's a really great segue. Can you expand on that a little bit, on what are some things to look out for when you're getting into those bigger deals? Not necessarily what mistakes, but learning opportunities perhaps, or things to
avoid, you mean, or to?
Yeah.
Well, so one of the biggest hurdles people need to overcome is the need to see the property before they buy it. And this is not only a challenge for the investors, but also a lot of the realtors. And because when you're buying a 20-unit building, you're buying it based on the numbers. You're not buying it based on how pretty it is, how functional it is. You're buying it on its financial viability. If you're going to buy a single family house as a rental property, yeah, there has to be some practicality to it. It needs to be a good layout and whatnot. But you're also going to be looking at its curb appeal and its location and whatnot, because it's a single family home. You can sell it as a single family home. With the multi-unit, it's always going to be a multi-unit. So stick to the numbers, keep the emotion out of it. And if the numbers make sense, then what you do is you make your offer and you get it under contract. Then as part of your conditions is you go and take a look at the property to see whether it's something you can live with or not, or whether it's got opportunity or whatever the case may be. And again, a lot of people get hung up on trying to negotiate their best deal up front, and just drives me crazy. And, well, let's negotiate. Let's go in as low as we can. Yeah, let's go in and do that and really tick off the vendor, and so that he doesn't want to sell it. They don't want to sell it to you, and we won't get a good deal at all. Whereas if you go in and negotiate what I say soft and get it under contract, do your due diligence, maybe you'll find out that it's worth what they're asking for and you're happy with it, and maybe not. But at least you've got it under contract during that time period of your due diligence, so that you can do your homework and make your decision whether you want it or not, or whether you want to renegotiate, etc. So, the big things to look out for when you're actually buying the bigger properties are your big ticket items: your roof, your windows, your heating system, and then just the general overall condition of the property. But your roof, and I've bought buildings with elevators and I've bought buildings with balconies, but I prefer not to, mainly because of the cost of maintenance for those items. So one building we bought, we knew it was going to need an elevator, and it was going to cost us about $225,000 for a new elevator. We thought we could wait for 5 years. Turns out we couldn't, so we had to come up with some creative financing to put that in. We also knew that it was going to need a new roof, and a new roof was going to be $125,000 on the building. So these are all things that become part of your negotiation set. And you have to decide whether you want to do it up front or whether you're going to put money aside and do it when the roof actually needs to be done in 2 years or 5 years, whatever the case may be. And I love to structure my deals where I love buying properties that have old furnaces, a rundown roof, things that need major repairs, because I will then renegotiate my deal to have the seller do the work before I take it over without changing the price, rather than reducing the price. So now I just had all of the work done, but it's been financed through the mortgage. So there's different ways of approaching these things, and instead of trying to find the money after the fact, let the seller take care of it on the front end. Oh, I could keep on talking, but I don't know whether.
Well, that's an interesting scenario that you gave there, because under a traditional residential mortgage, we can do purchase plus, but you're just going about it a different way and giving them the price they want and saying that this is what I want included with it. So
yeah, nice. Purchase plus, correct me if I'm wrong, is more commonly used in the residential market than it is in the commercial market.
Exactly.
And a lot of properties in the commercial market are purchased with CMHC financing as well. Like everything I've done has been CMHC.
Yeah.
That's the other big thing, is with CMHC financing, you can do it with as little as 15% down. Whereas if you're in the residential market, you have to put 20% down.
Yeah, and coming July, we got some big news with certain products with CMHC going as high as 50-year M and maybe even 5% down.
Yep, exactly. So I'm taking advantage of that for my fourth building. We're doing the 50-year amortization, which will help compensate the higher interest rates we're having to pay. So it's a nice, it's unfortunate we can't take advantage of that and the lower interest rates, but got to look at the bottom line. So
yep, exactly.
So you touched a little bit on this just a minute ago, Ken, but when you say let's get the building under contract, closer probably to the seller's asking price, and then we go through the due diligence process and figure out what we are actually comfortable in paying and what all needs to go into the building. Can you talk a little bit about what that due diligence process is for a bigger building and how that compares to something smaller?
Yep. So the due diligence there's probably 3, maybe 4 conditions that are common in the process. Obviously, financing is the most common one, and the financing these days depends whether you're doing conventional financing or whether you're doing private financing or whether you're going through CMHC. If you're doing CMHC, they have shortened it down a little bit so that it used to be 6 weeks. Now it's and then it got up to as much as about 12 weeks. Now it's back to about 8 weeks, apparently, to turn things around with CMHC. So a lot of vendors aren't excited to accept a condition that's going to tie their property up for 2 months. But that is one of the conditions is financing. There's a couple different strategies you can work on with respect to that, but that's not in the scope of this question. The next one would be inspection of the property. And it's not like a home inspection. It is and it isn't. But it could also involve a variety of different inspectors. It depends on the type of property we're looking at. So if you're looking at a large, 22, 36 unit building with a flat roof, well, your home inspector or equivalent of a home inspector is not going to be a flat roof specialist. He's not going to be, he or she's not going to be an elevator specialist. They may not have their specialty in boilers, etc. So they would be good to be doing the envelope of the building, the windows, each individual unit, etc. But you may want to also have an HVAC company come in and inspect the furnaces and see what's the remaining life expectancy of that furnace, that boiler. Have your roofer of choice come and inspect the roof to see what the condition is, how long, much more lifespan do you have in that? Same thing with the elevator. So it's the same but different, a little bit larger scale. And obviously, if you're having a single family or a duplex home inspected for $600 to $1,000, well, you're not going to get that for your building, your multi-unit building. The cheapest I think I've had it is $3,500. So $3,500 to $6,000 depends. If you need to get engineers involved, because the HVAC and the roofers usually do it for free because they're hoping to get future business from you. Okay, so you can have them come in and give you a quote for a new roof, a new furnace, etc. But you're looking at a larger cost for sure. Then you've got also going back to the financing. Tied to that is going to be an appraisal and environmental studies. You very rarely will get away without having to do an environmental study unless you're doing less than 60% loan to value financing. Then our RBC, for example, will just do a questionnaire. But if it's above 60%, then they want a full-blown environmental study, and that's going to cost you $2,500 to $2,800. The appraisal, even with CMHC, they used to do their own appraisals. They've now downloaded that cost onto us. So we have to do the appraisal and provide it to them, which is actually, I prefer anyways. And because they'll use that appraisal, which is usually higher than what theirs were in the past. So I get a better, higher loan to value mortgage now. But there's another $2,500 to $2,800 cost out of pocket. And you're going to be spending money like this. You could be spending $10,000 easily with no assurance that you're even going to get the property. And that has happened to me in the past. So a lot of people, a lot of investors are cheap mindset. And they say, well, I'm not going to spend the money if I can't be sure I'm going to get it. Well, then you're in the wrong business. Okay, because $10,000 on a $4 or $5 million acquisition is a drop in the bucket and is nothing. And if you're worried about the $10,000, then you shouldn't be in this game at all. Okay. So be prepared to spend that kind of money. With CMHC, you've got a $150 per door application fee. And again, you could be turned down, but you've lost that application fee. So there's a lot of money that you could be putting out of pocket during your due diligence period that you may not see a return on, because if you walk away from the deal, obviously you've walked away for a good reason. That's going to cost you more money than the $10,000 that cost you to get that far. In other words, maybe you'll discover mold throughout the attic or something like that. That's going to, or asbestos. I mean, I had to do an asbestos remediation, which cost me $35,000. So you have to do a cost analysis, whether you want to keep moving forward at $35,000 or not, or do you walk away from it? So there's your financing, there's your inspection, a couple little caveats in there. Then due diligence on the costs of the operating that property. So you're going to want to ask for at least 2 years worth of financials. from the current owner of the property to see what the income and expenses are for that property, and you want proof of what the expenses are. You want to see copies of the leases to verify that they are accurate and that they are who they say they are. And you need time to go through the numbers to make sure that, because believe it or not, I'm sorry to say this, Brad, but realtors have a habit of not necessarily telling the truth or sharing all of the information, which really drives me crazy because we have to play that game as well. So when we are actually posting a listing, we share the utility costs. Those are the hard costs, but we're not going to share necessarily what the maintenance costs are, because maybe you're going to do your own maintenance. It's going to be different. Maybe you're going to do your own property management. So those costs don't get included in the pro forma, which makes the value of the property looks much better, right? So that's a little bit of a game, and that's what you're going to discover during your due diligence, you know, what those true numbers are. Oh, you're on mute.
How about now?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, right. Lots to think about. Like there's, as far as that due diligence goes, there's a lot to go into it as far as the building itself, as well as the financials, and just wading through all that and understanding it, and then being able to make the decision on like what is the true net operating income, what are the true expenses, what is this going to cost me to get into it, how far down that road do I want to go, and then what does it look like over that, how long am I going to own it for, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and then like how much am I going to make from it off of that. It just a lot more number crunching I found with multifamilies compared to the
Yeah, and again, you have to also look in the magic ball and try and forecast what's the future going to be, because you don't know what the interest rates are going to be in the future. Now, I strongly believe that the interest rates over the next 10 years are not going to skyrocket. We're not going to see like 6, 7, 8% interest. Otherwise, why would they be offering us 10-year terms at 3.5%, right? But what does 0.5% do to your bottom line? On a duplex, triplex, not a whole lot. On a large multi-unit building with a $4 million mortgage, it's significant. All of a sudden, your cash flow has been reduced by $10,000 just with a 0.5% interest. So at what point, and this is something I used to do all the time, is I would say, okay, at a 0.5% interest rate, my cash flow is going to be X number of dollars. At 1%, when it reaches 4%, it's going to be X number of dollars. When does it become zero? Well, at 5%, it's going to be a zero cash flow. Am I prepared to take that risk and hope that it's not going to reach 5%, in the next 5 years or whatever that time period is, right? So you can do all of those calculations to assess what the risk is going to be.
So yeah, there's lots to think about. I know we're up against it for time here, so
my watch is falling off. That's all.
No, we're up against it for time. So thanks so much, Ken, for sharing some of your experience with us. It's just I know we could jump on again and chat again down the road and get into it a little bit more. Thanks a lot, Karen, for helping to facilitate this. And I think we can leave it at that.
Yeah, no, anytime you've got other questions that you want answered, that you think is of value for your clients, be more than happy to get on. And as long as you feel there's value, I'm happy to do it.
Right
awesome.
on.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.